Welcome back to our final session, which will end at the latest at 5:30. It'll end earlier if everyone's exhausted and you stop talking. Okay, so what we're going to do in this final session is Angie Hobbs, whom I'll introduce properly in a minute, is going to give us her view of things, and then for about 20 minutes. And then I'm going to invite members of the Stoicism Today team to respond, and members of the other participants to respond. And then we can proceed from that, if there's time available, to any other issues that members of the panel want to raise, questions that we feel are important for us to think about, and or views that you haven't had a chance to express, or responses to the Live Like a Stoic week that you might want to share with us at this point. So it's fairly, apart from Angie's contribution, it's fairly free floating. Okay, so let me now introduce Angie Hobbs, who's as well as being a very old friend of mine, is Professor of the Public Presentation of Philosophy at the University of Sheffield. She's not, I think it's fair for me to say, a card-carrying, paid-up Stoic. So we don't know what she's going to say, but she knows much of what's happened today. She's been to 2 workshops. She's seen some of the papers. And so she's going to give us her view of these matters, and then we're going to respond to that. So Angie, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I think thank you. We're old friends up till now.
Yes.
So Chris phoned me up and he sort of said, well, look, I said, I know that you have a lot of reservations about Stoicism, but I don't want this to be some kind of complacent love-in. I want an astringent voice. So come and throw yourself to the lions. But of course you're not lions, you're Stoics and aspiring Stoics. So though I'm going to be raising some questions and concerns about Stoicism, you're not going to get angry, because that would be a negative passion. You are going to be full of joy at what I say. And I am entering into Stoic Week with great enthusiasm, not as a Stoic, but I thought it needed a test control, so I'm living like an Epicurean for a week. Actually, that's not nearly as much fun as it sounds. They were very austere, was Epicurus, very pure, liked bread and water, but this is my take on Epicureanism. I don't want to kind of feed into stereotypes of Stoicism, so I'm going to try not to do that. I'm going to try to be a little bit nuanced. And there's lots of things about Stoicism that I like. And the first thing to say is I hugely approve of this project. So my concerns about Stoicism are not concerns about the worth and value and importance of this project. It is enormously important. It's great you're doing this. I'm going to be open-minded about the results. It doesn't surprise me that there have already been some positive results from 2013. It was sort of 14% increase in sort of general sense of well-being. I think the good results were between 9 and 14%, but I think there was something like, there was a massive increase in joy, wasn't there? So yeah, so
that was a big one.
Very good increase in joy and a good decrease in negative emotions. I'm going to be interested. It's not a skeptical question, it's a genuine question. I'm going to be interested to see how these results are analysed and how much of the increase in positive emotions and a sense of well-being comes as a direct result of the minutes or hour or whatever a day you spend on the exercises and on meditational exercises. Because it would be interesting if that 9% is exactly the amount each day you're spending focusing on positive thoughts in your meditations, then that might account for that. But I'd be interested to know if those meditational exercises spill over into positive effects in the rest of the day. So I hope when you analyse these results, you look quite precisely about, is this positive effect over and above the time people spend meditating? I mean, I do yoga, and I think about flowers and the Cornish coast path and things like that, and I feel, happy while I'm doing it. Okay, now, I mean, there's lots of good things about Stoicism, like nearly all ancient ethics. It's agent-centered. It focuses on questions of how to live and what sort of person to be, which I specialize in the ethics of flourishing and virtue, though usually more from a Platonic or Aristotelian perspective. But I personally find this approach to ethics much richer, and it embraces questions of the narrative structure of a life and the lived, felt experience of a life, and I find that a more appealing approach than ethical approaches which concentrate on acts, whether the acts are permissible or impermissible, as in rights and obligation-based ethics, such as Kant, or whether we look at the consequences of acts, such as in utilitarianism. So Stoic ethics fits in generally with an approach to ethics which I find very rewarding and appealing. I find the general conception of flourishing, as you know, the ancient Greek word eudaimonia does not directly translate as happiness. It translates literally as living blessed by a good guardian, beneficent guardian spirit. It's a more objective notion than happiness, and certainly more objective than pleasure. Hopefully feelings of happiness and pleasure will be included, but it's much more to do with actualizing your best potential as a human being, and you can therefore see immediately the connection between flourishing and virtue. And certain virtues need to be exercised in order for flourishing to take place. And indeed, the state of flourishing will be, as we'll see in a moment, the same as the state of virtue in Stoicism. I find that very attractive. I find the whole notion of your virtue and your flourishing being up to you and your responsibility deeply attractive. And the fact that it's available to people of all races and classes and wealth bases and genders. So there's so much to like about Stoicism, and I do like it. And I find a lot of the exercises very helpful. Again, I'm not remotely surprised that they improve people's sense of well-being. And just one brief personal anecdote. Now, my father was not a card-carrying Stoic, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But I've never forgotten. We would talk about his experiences in and after the war, and he was in the Indian Army, and he was in the retreat from Burma, and though he wasn't captured, he could have had a worse war experience, but it was still horrible, the retreat from Burma. He was in all the major battles. He witnessed great atrocities and suffering. Goodness knows what he had to do. And I remember him saying that he made a decision on the boat back to England that he was going to be happy for the rest of his life, basically. And he said it was a very clear decision. He said he was very well aware that the experiences he'd had for the last 4 years could destroy him forever. And he decided he did not want that. And he was not going to focus a great deal of attention on these war events. And it wasn't, he said, I know you think this is anally retentive and repression, but it isn't. I and people like me, we could not have survived the rest of our lives had we not made a decision to be happy and to give our mind to certain things and to give much less mind to others. And he said it is a daily exercise. It is a daily exercise in self-discipline and self-control and what you give your attention to and what you choose to care about. And he said, I was going to have a family if I could, and children, and make a happy home and be happy. And he just sort of, and I was very interested in this. Now he was a Christian, and rather than a Stoic, but there was a lot in common with Stoicism here. which doesn't surprise me because he had a very classical education, would have read a lot of Seneca and Cicero and Marcus Aurelius at school, so it's not surprising. So I'm not negative about all aspects of Stoicism by any means. I'm certainly not negative about the worth and value of this project, and I'm not just hoping, I'm actually expecting to see some positive results. However, I have been asked to be an astringent voice. So here are some questions. And I said I'll try not to feed into any stereotypes. Now, my main problem with Stoic ethics is that it is based on a metaphysics and a physics and a theology that I simply don't believe. And it's very closely based on that, particularly in the Greek founding fathers, in Zeno and Chrysippus, who are kind of hardcore Stoicism. I think to some extent we get a bit of Stoicism light by the time we get to Roman Stoics. And I think that's a good thing. That is not a criticism on my part. I think Stoicism should be Stoicism light. I think we should cherry pick Stoicism. I think real hardcore Zeno and Chrysippus Stoicism is not just very difficult to achieve, I think it would be dangerous. So here's, as you know, the Stoics thought that there is passive matter in the world, which is, they have a materialistic and deterministic conception of the cosmos, which is composed of passive matter, which is infused with active divine reason. And this active divine reason is organizing everything for the best. This is the best of all possible worlds. And your virtue and your flourishing are going to consist in acknowledging that fact and accepting it and embracing it and realizing that you are a part, you have a spark of this divine reason in you. You are a part of a bigger whole, and things which initially look baffling and painful to you and to others are part of a bigger picture. Now, I really worry about this because I can see that in some cases it is both accurate and therapeutic to change our view of something. I can see that in some cases it is helpful always to think, is there a bigger picture here? It's a good question to ask. Is there a bigger picture? Am I missing the bigger picture? That can be an accurate and helpful and therapeutic thing to do. But I don't think it's always the case. I personally find it distasteful to think of some things as actually part of a bigger picture, certain catastrophic environmental disasters. The glories of ISIS at the moment. I do not think these are part of a bigger overall design. And personally, I don't want to offend people, but I wouldn't want to follow a God who did want me to think that. Is global warming, is that meant to be part of a bigger overall design? Are we meant to be signing up to global warming because it is all arranged for the best? So there are real questions here. A linked set of questions is, yes, I can see that it's helpful for the Stoics to say, accept what you can't change. The things that are not up to you, do not fuss about them. Accept them. You can't, worry about the things. Well, not worry, don't worry. But be concerned with the things that are up to you and kind of let go the things that are not up to you, which you can't change. How do you know what you can't change until you kind of try? So I think there are real problems which need to be faced head on. Now, I accept that in antiquity, particularly in the Roman world, a lot of Stoics did take a very active part in political life. I know that's true, and we're going to come back to that in a minute, because actually that's another whole other set of problems, the kind of parts they did play. But there is at least an inherent danger. I'm not saying it's an inevitability, and a danger that the fatalism in Stoicism can lead to an excessive passivity. And I have similar views about the Stoic goal of extirpating the negative passions. Now, it's all, as John was saying, I know I wasn't here this morning, but I read your paper. As John rightly says, you know, it's not that the Stoics are hostile to all passions. We want joy. It's just negative passions based on false value judgments that we have to get rid of. And you think, well, that's fine. But of course, there's a danger of a circular argument here. If you're going to define anger and fear and grief as negative passions based on false value judgments, well, okay, maybe get rid of them. But is that how they should be described? So it's whether you describe all the passions that cause you pain, whether you describe them as based on false value judgments. And that, of course, is going to go back to the metaphysical, physical, and theological basis of the ethics, which, as I've said, I don't sign up to the basis. So it seems to me that in certain cases, I think it's always very helpful for the Stoics to say, consider if you've got a very painful emotion, a very painful negative passion, such as anger, I can see it's helpful to ask yourself, is this based on a true or a false value judgment? And quite often you will find it is based on a false value judgment, and you should be trying to get rid of the passion. I can see that's a helpful therapeutic exercise. But again, I think there are certain things that happen, and I'm with Aristotle on this one, which should make us angry. And I think there are certain things which we should grieve as part of our humanity. Partly because the anger and the grief might help us instigate changes which we can make and we ought to be making, and partly simply, and this is a personal view, and I agree, I accept not all the panel, maybe none of the panel will agree with me here, I actually think that feeling anger and grief at certain events is an important part of our humanity, and that even if there's no particular change that can be instigated or any particular therapy that can be achieved, I feel it's important that we have to suffer these emotions from time to time. If I have, so where are we? I think I've got 4 to 5 minutes. Now, another point which is in one way a good point, and I've mentioned it as a good point, but there are dangers. The Stoic notion that we are part of an overall cosmopolis, a cosmic community of rational beings. On the plus side, as I've mentioned, it's great because it cuts through class and gender and race barriers. And they were very strong on that. They were very good on that. And as we were hearing earlier about, you know, it was Musonius Rufus, the tutor of Marcus Aurelius, you know, writes 2 discourses on why women should be studying philosophy. Good stuff. Mind you, Plato had said it years before. But anyway. So, but there we go. I mean, Stoicism has deep roots in Socratic philosophy, so it's not entirely surprising. So that's all good, but, and this is a genuine concern, and I don't just have it with the Stoics, I have it with Kant as well, who has a lot of Stoic elements in Kant, in fact. I think it places too much weight on the importance of rationality as what connects us. And the danger of that is not only where does that leave non-rational animals, and for the Stoics, not having seen David Attenborough, that would probably be all animals. Where does it leave plants? But also, where does it leave humans who are not as rational as other humans, or maybe not rational at all, either through disability or accident or illness or Alzheimer's or whatever? There are questions. I'm not saying the Stoics have no answers here, but there are questions about if you're going to base your notion of a cosmic community on shared rationality, where does that leave non-rational or not fully rational beings, whether humans or animals or plants? Now, the other thing about this cosmopolis, the world community, which again, which does sound great, and it has its roots, of course, in Stoicism. It's no accident that Stoicism emerges in about 300 BC. The Macedonian Empire of Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great had basically destroyed the city-state, the polis, as a functioning political unit. And it's, you know, it's not news that philosophy and ethical philosophy responds goes in two different directions, often simultaneously, as with the Stoics. One, people start to turn inwards and think, well, if I don't have much control over my immediate political sort of surroundings, my city-state anymore, what kind of control do I have over my life? Let's look inward. And that's, as I said, that's an old theory, that's not new. But also, because the city-state, as the political unit is being destroyed, there is also this notion of the whole world. Let's look at the whole cosmos. Let's get rid of these political city-state barriers. Well, that sounds great, except you think, okay, this also seems to give license to empire building. You know, exactly what Alexander is doing. Alexander used to take philosophers with him on his campaigns. He was very interested in this notion of a cosmopolis, so he saw himself as the leader of it. And it is simply a historical fact that Stoicism has been very attractive to imperialists, whether Roman or 18th and 19th century British imperialists. It has been the philosophy of choice for imperialists. Let's get rid of all these barriers and let's have a world community, but let's run it. So, and I was going back earlier saying there is there is an inherent danger that Stoicism can make one too politically passive, I think. And I said at the time, I accept that quite a lot of the Roman Stoics in particular were politically very active. Well, they weren't passive, but they were active in many cases building a Roman Empire. So, I'm not saying these are inevitable consequences. I'm just saying that historically they have happened. It's not a completely cozy, hippie kind of philosophy, or that's not how it's been used, is what I'm saying. And then in its purest forms, particularly in its sort of tough Greek forms, but to some extent in the Roman forms, so they don't focus on this quite so much, it is a very tough and uncompromising ethic. You are either completely good or completely bad, and basically they're not sure if anybody's ever been a completely good sage. And no matter how far you are on the path towards goodness, because you should be going on that path, you should be chugging along, but you're still completely bad. And as they kind of winningly put it, you know, a man drowns just as effectively, is just as much dead if he drowns if he's just a few inches below the surface of the water as if he's very, very deep down under the ocean. If you're struggling to get to the light, but you don't get to the light, you drown, whether you're meters under or just a few centimeters. So it is very tough, it's very austere. I just throw this in. It's not an entirely cozy, touchy-feely thing. And as I mentioned at the beginning, and this is my final point, Stoics themselves, now what would they say about this day? It would be interesting. I think they'd be very intrigued. I think they would think it was really valuable and important. But I think they would say, just remember that the ethics is constructed on this foundation of metaphysics and theology and logic. What do you do if you don't sign up to all of that? Is there still stuff you can get out of it? Yes, absolutely. I get masses out of Plato's ethics, and I don't believe in the theory of forms. So it's not that there is nothing to be gained, but just bear in mind, this is supposed to be the best of all possible worlds, because that is how the rational God has ordained it. And if you don't think that, then you have to question why it's so good to live according to nature. Because the whole basis of living according to nature is nature is rational and has organised everything for the best. That's why living in accordance with nature is good. And if you don't think everything is always organised according to the best, then there may be other reasons to live in accordance with nature, but you need to find them. Okay, so thank you very, very much.
Okay, well, it's working again. Okay, well, thank you very much, Angie, for all those questions. Don't know whether we're going to answer all of them, but let's have a go. Okay, well, as I'm in the chair, I'm going to try and answer one of them, and then I'm going to pass over to others. I think just on this point of nature and providentiality, I think they believe in a rather different view of providentiality than you were suggesting. They do think the universe is ordered, and they do think it's providential in certain senses, but it's a very different from the kind of what sounded like the rather optimistic, Candide-like sense of everything working out for the best that you were suggesting. For instance, global warming, if they were asked to, of course they didn't have global warming, but if they had, they'd have said, well, okay, this is not for the best in the sense that somehow nature is inbuilt for this to be the best state of affairs. We have global warming because of actions that human beings who have rationality have abused their rationality and exploited natural resources and have produced these results. So the way they think that the universe is for the best is rational is that first of all, it's a seamless web of cause and effect. So global warming occurs for causes that are in principle intelligible. And in that sense, the universe is rational, and in that sense, it's better for the world to be one that is in principle rational, in principle intelligible, than for it to be random and inexplicable. So I think it's quite a sophisticated form of providentiality. And the other way in which I think they think the universe is providential, in that all the species that there are have an inbuilt desire and capacity to preserve themselves and to generate others of their kind. And again, that's quite a sophisticated form of providentiality, which we might also accept today. So just a couple of quick replies, whether I convince anyone. Okay, but let me pass over to others, and I also want this session, or we want this session to be, to have lots of voices in it. But can I ask if there are members of the panel, we're not only going to have the panel, but if there are members of the panel who would like to respond to any of Angie's extremely challenging suggestions.
I like to
yeah, there's quite a few. Yeah, okay. Donald, do you want to go in first?
Yes, well...
you're bigger than me. He's so much bigger than me.
No fight. No fighting. No.
Well, it's 7 against 1.
I know, it's not...
Well, you can draw in members of the participants if you would.
You could recruit some, yeah.
You also have many philosophical schools on your side too, which you've drawn on. Anyway, Donald.
Well, I'm just going to make a couple of comments, and they're not intended to be sort of knockdown arguments or anything like that, but maybe things that would need to be taken account of. And one of them is to refer to the workshop that we did with Stoicism and Love. You seem to imply that Stoicism was problematic because it didn't extend moral consideration to non-rational beings. But the Stoics believed that small children lacked reason, and yet they clearly extended moral consideration to them. And in fact, they say that the natural affection that a parent has for their offspring is the basis of their morality, and we saw the quote from Epictetus where he says that it's not even within our power not to...
They're potentially rational, though, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the argument that's the argument that Kant makes. You know, potentially rational beings are okay, but you've still got a problem with people who are disabled or...
Yeah.
I mean...
And that's a problem for
me. They would have to find another... All I'm saying is they would have to find another reason for the... And then I'm sure that, you know, there are. I'm not trying to stereotype the Stoics.
There are some instances that are problematic for them. I'm not too bothered about plants and stuff, but they but they to be plantists, but they also, I think some of the criticisms that you made would apply to other philosophical ethics.
Indeed,
as well,
yes.
Obviously. Yeah. You mentioned Kantianism. Maybe some of them would even apply to Platonism.
Of course, of course.
Do you need to accept Stoic metaphysics wholesale in order to believe in their ethics? I mean, that's really the question here, because I doubt if anyone in the room does. So probably all of the people here who believe in Stoic ethics believe that it can be maintained independently of 3rd century BC metaphysics.
I'm just saying the founding fathers probably wouldn't have agreed, but that doesn't matter. I mean, if
maybe that doesn't matter.
You know, I get lots out of Plato, and I'm not a Platonist.
Yeah, you don't agree with everything that he said.
And I think the Romans cherry-picked Stoicism hugely. So, I mean, I think quite a lot of the ancient Greeks did.
Well, just an observation. I mean, Marcus Aurelius, I think about 6 times mentions, or seems to allude to this idea that whether you believe in God or whether you believe in atoms, either way, the Stoic ethical theories hold true, because he believed that they had other lines of argument aside from physics that would support them, and he's quite explicit about that.
I was just sort of throwing God back in the picture.
Yeah.
There are. Well, anyway, any other responses from other panel members? Yes.
Just on that same point. I mean, I think to present the Stoics as some form of humanists that give priority to rational human beings is not quite right. I mean,
they're deists.
The rational principle that they think that all rational adults share, of course, extends throughout all of nature. Extends through the animal world, the plant world, the mineral world. It's the same rational principle that unites everything. And there's no kind of, although obviously there is a point where a human becomes rational, there's no rigid distinction in kind. It's a kind of a development of complexity. It's on a continuum. So there's a continuum from plant life through animal life to human life that hasn't perhaps fulfilled its rationality, and then the perfectly ideal rational agent, rather than... So I think that there's room for
I think that's a very good point and a really important point, but there's still a hierarchy, isn't there? There is still a hierarchy with this ideal sage at the top.
There is. It's a hierarchy that they present in terms of complexity. So some things are more advanced than others. But I'm not sure, I wouldn't want to characterise it as a moral hierarchy.
Okay.
But,
no, I agree with you. But we're going back, how long? Because we used to debate this. We used to debate many years ago, John and I. And he was always the most vigorous debater. I agree with you. I think that's right. But if you've still got that focus on shared rationality, I'm not saying that this is an inevitable consequence that it has to lead to that problem. I'm just saying there is an inherent danger that it could. It's exactly the same with Kant's kingdom of ends. Any system which so privileges rationality rather than Bentham's, he said the question is not does it think, but does it feel? Does it feel pain? That's the question. The question isn't whether an animal can think, but whether it can suffer. I'm just saying there is an inherent danger. I'm not saying it's inevitable. I think your points are very good ones and important ones. I accept them.
Okay, other panel members who might want to... Tim, you look as Anne Patrick would like to respond, I think.
Yes. With regards to the Logos, that is a debate that has been going on within the Stoic community. And I think I personally agree with you completely. And in a response that I wrote to Mark Vernon, who was arguing the opposite, I was saying that what we need to do is construct a version of Stoicism that is acceptable to us these days, is helpful, and we're finding out it's helpful, and it's inclusive, so you don't have to believe in God to think of it. And what I'd add to that is that, judging by the results that we've seen, it does seem that because the Stoics, I think the thing that they've got over the Aristotelians particularly is they've got all these exercises. There is that very practical side to it, and it does seem that yes, we are. I don't know what the Greek Stoics would have thought of what we're doing. They might well have taken quite a dim view, actually. Perhaps. I don't know. I don't know, but it seems that this kind of I don't quite like the word Stoicism. I prefer to call it modern Stoicism.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that we are constructing something that does hold together, and I don't know if Patrick might have something to say about the nature things. I think you've got some arguments about how you're not necessarily reliant on some of that hard Stoicism about that. Just to come back to the other thing about the questionnaires, and you said about, is it just that they're happy for a few moments? Well, some of those questions are about their overall satisfaction with life. But I do think there is a very valid point about, yes, we need to do more research. We have to make sure that our research is up to the standards of that you'd expect if this is going to be taken further. So the research is certainly in its early days, and I'd be the first to admit that.
Okay, Patrick, a quick
I think for time reasons it might be nice actually for others to...
Okay.
The Jules is very...
Oh, Jules.
No, I was going to say, let's see what the audience thinks. I agree with, I thought it was a great talk, and it showed to me that I don't think any philosophy is kind of perfect, and there's things that Stoicism misses out. I think Plato had a much more interesting theory of the imagination and of the arts, and things like music and theatre and literature, how they educate the emotions. So yeah, I think one can be eclectic. And
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Before we go on to invite comments from participants, can I just say we have been dishing around a question, one of these wonderful questionnaire forms. So if you wouldn't mind filling it up and giving it as you go out to one of the people with bags. Okay. So now let's. Who would like to contribute to this discussion in any way you like, either to your views about these questions or okay.
There's somebody right at the back as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll just throw a quick one in. Angie, what you're saying to...
Throw it in with the microphone. Oh, we can all hear you.
If it works this time?
Yeah.
Angie, just one interesting thing to extend what you're saying. My interest is in taking all this philosophy, looking at Stoicism, and extending to the future of computers and technology. And one of the groups that can be extended in that moral or non-moral is as we approach some kind of artificial intelligence and artificial consciousness, and where that fits into it all.
I didn't hear the actual question. I heard what you were interested in. I didn't hear
the question is, where would that fit in?
Artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. So it's a complexity increasing from plant to animal to man to
You can.
beyond.
I haven't thought, but Chris is keen to get in.
Well, I think it's one of the very interesting things about Stoicism. They do believe, which one of the points that John's made, rationality pervades the universe. So they have no problem with artificial intelligence at all, or distributed cognition. It's really entirely in line with their view of the pervasive presence of rationality. So I think we have a response there. Yeah, I think there's... Yeah. Okay.
Is there a mic?
Yeah, Patrick's got a mic.
I've got it. My name is Joe. I have just a comment really about the whole evening or the whole day, and it's about the subject of virtue, because it seems that virtue seems to be at the center of everything that's been discussed, but in my view, it was the one thing that wasn't discussed. Nobody actually defined what virtue is. We went round and round it, but never actually got to it. And also, there was a sort of some comments made that it's not prescriptive, moralistic kind of philosophy, Stoicism. And yet, there's a continuous use of the words like moral, value judgments, virtue, excessive or not enough. All those things are value judgments. They're all moral type of words, which is an extraordinary vocabulary to use if you're saying it's not actually a prescriptive morality. So I don't have opinion yet of Stoicism because I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me where it says in Stoicism what actually virtue actually is, which is this thing that we should want to attain to if we're Stoics.
Well, you can go. I mean, I've certainly got a response because I actually did in my talk. I actually did.
Well, you say.
I mean, your virtue and your flourishing are the same thing. They are your acknowledgement and acceptance of your place in the greater scheme of things, and in the nuanced and subtle way that Chris was delineating, your acceptance that things have been rationally ordered for the best and the kind of peace of mind that brings. Chris, do you want to?
So what is that position?
There is no difference really between your flourishing and your virtue.
That's right.
So what is my flourishing?
Are those qualities, as I suggested earlier, that are essential to leading a human life. They're the qualities without which you can't imagine a good human life, which they define in terms of justice, courage, self-control, and justice. And they have, so that is their view of justice. Now, of virtue. So in that sense, they are. Stoicism is very value-laden. It does think virtue is the basis of happiness. What they don't believe, though, is that that any one of us is in a position to tell anybody else how to conduct their life in the sense that they have to conduct their life. For all of us, it's up to us how we behave. And we can try and persuade, we can try and suggest, but it's in that sense that it's not judgmental.
Yeah,
we're all on a journey. We're all on a journey towards wisdom.
The difference is you can have an ethical philosophy, which is a suggestion about how someone should live, but that's different to it being imposed on someone. There's a difference between a kind of suggestion, you ought to do this and that, and saying you must, you have to, which might be a kind of legislative thing. So the Stoics, take Marcus Aurelius, he was the emperor of Rome. He could have tried to impose Stoic ethics onto the entire Roman Empire and say, you must follow these things. But he said, that's never going to work because unless someone really believes it inside, then all you're going to get is feigned assent, grudging, subjection, which is kind of what happened, say, in the USSR. A kind of philosophy imposed from on high. But if people don't really believe it, they're just going through the motions. So there's the difference, you see?
I get that bit, Jules, completely. The bit I'm saying, well, what are those virtues? Okay, you're not imposing it on, but what are you suggesting? What I think might be interesting, if you guys would be in agreement with this, is if you could actually, on the Meetup website afterwards, maybe post some of the key texts that actually discuss what Stoic virtue actually is, what they actually mean and how they define virtue. I'd be very interested to read it.
Okay, Angie would like to come in.
I'd be interested to know if the other members of the panel agree with me. To me, Stoic notion of the virtues in the plural is hugely indebted to the Socratic notion of the unity of virtue, in that it's knowledge, it's sort of knowledge of the human good, but that will look, how that plays out will depend on the circumstances that you're in. So if you're on a battlefield, that will play out as courage. If you're in a temple, it'll play out as piety. If you're distributing scant resources, it'll play out as justice, and so on. So it's one fundamental state of mind and kind of understanding, but it will look different in different life circumstances. I don't know if the panel... So in that, it's deeply Socratic. But in lots of ways, the Stoics actually are very Socratic, and they acknowledge themselves as such.
Yeah, I think we could move on. Kevin has how many other? Yeah, there's several people here trying to get questions in.
Quick question: Did Stoicists equate rationality to objectivity?
And is there such thing called objectivity? If you take into account the quantum mechanics now, there isn't such thing called objectivity. So I'm just wondering if, you know, rationality and objectivity are the same thing.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Objectivity and rationality.
It's rationality, objectivity, and then what the exact question about quantum mechanics?
Based on modern, you know, physics, basically there isn't such thing called objectivity. You know, every time we view things, we change things. So if there isn't such thing called objectivity, and if I don't know if there's the Stoics consider rationality as objectivity. So I'm just wondering.
You're talking about whether the knower alters the known, are you? Are you talking about Heisenberg? I mean, that doesn't have to be not objective. That's relative, but relativism and objectivity can go together. I mean, what do the other panel think here?
I think it's a huge question. Can we? I think maybe we. Some others. We've only got 3 minutes. I'm very conscious of and many hands waving in the air. Can we dwell on that one?
I wanted to just make a distinction. Today has been maybe an Aristotelian distinction between happiness and flourishing. It seems to me that happiness is everywhere in the government's agenda. It's David Cameron's second favourite word. I think adversity is his first favourite word. But it's in the agenda of happiness. It's a snapshot. It tells you happiness in the moment, while flourishing, the Aristotelian notion of flourishing, which of course is translated as well-being, seems to me to give a kind of sense of purpose and drive. I think that the importance, whether you choose to be an Aristotelian, a Platonist, or a Stoic, or even a Neo-Stoic, I think this really is an important agenda that we've got here, because this Greek tradition, and it's why the Greeks and Romans matter so much, which is the sort of Angie's and other people's intervention here, is because it offers us a very good counterbalance to the kind of even reductive utilitarianism that is informing government thinking around happiness and well-being.
Yeah. Completely agree with you.
Yeah, I think we can only just have one more question, and then we need to end on time, I'm afraid.
Could I go back to Angie Hobbs' question about the utility of the research? I agree measuring self-reported satisfaction might be slightly circular, might just correlate to how much time we spend doing the exercises. But a lot of what we've been hearing about Stoicism today, particularly in Professor Gill's session, was about the social dimension, the relationships, the universality, the love, even, that we heard about in Donna Robertson's workshop. So could one do some research, before and after research, about our satisfaction with our relationships? Yeah. I think I'm speaking purely hypothetically. Do I manage to get upset with my immediate family less often as a Stoic than as a pre-Stoic?
I think it's an excellent question. I hope it is. I'm hoping I am going to do some of these Stoic exercises, and I'm hoping I can deal with a 15-year-old better.
I think, sadly, we're going to have to draw this to a close. A couple of things, just a general response. Thank you very much for some of these suggestions. We need to say more about virtue. We need to do more research. There's a lot of interesting things for us to do. Some of them we'll try and do fairly quickly through the blog, but others will form the basis of further work that we hope to do together. We hope to go on working together. We hope to raise funds to do more things. And we're delighted that so many of you have come today, have entered so fully into the spirit of the day, and that you feel that Stoicism can be a part of your life. So that's terrific. So thank all you. And finally, would you pass your questionnaires to people with bags on the door, or if you can't find them on the door, just leave them on the information desk. Thank you so much.
Right, do you want to...
We survived.
What do you think of the reenactment?